Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, here to bring you the first episode in our Falcons roster review series. We're going to be going through each position on the Falcons roster, so we're talking about the biggest things you need to know. If you're a fantasy head, we'll cover some of that stuff, but it's mostly going to be about sort of how these positions look, how we're looking going into training camp. Is there anything that needs to change? Do further additions need to be made? What type of production can we expect? Are these going to be some of the stronger or weaker positions on Atlanta's roster? So that's sort of the gist of today's episode, is we're going to be covering as much of that stuff as we can. And, you know, this is a fun group today, obviously, with Bijan Robinson headlining the Falcons running back room. I was going to start with quarterback because that's like sort of the traditional starting point for most of these things, right? But given that I just had a great episode with JP Acosta come out like a week ago where we went over the quarterback room in detail, I figured we'd let quarterback simmer a little bit. I'm going to try to get a guest on once again to talk about that group. But for the running backs, I think this is also a very fun group, and we did actually have a little tiny nugget of news regarding the running backs, so it seemed like an opportune time to start with this group, which, you know, for many teams, it seems like running back is becoming more and more of an afterthought. But for the Falcons, running back is not an afterthought. Running back is arguably the strongest position group in terms of the starter and the backup on the roster. It's exceptional. Obviously, Bijan Robinson is the headliner, but Tyler Allgeier, I think, has a claim to being a super underrated running back, perhaps the most underrated running back in the entire NFL, partially, of course, due to the situation here in Atlanta where he has to sit behind Bijan Robinson, who is a running back that sort of demands 300 carries in a season or more. So it's a difficult situation for Allgeier to be in, and it probably means this will be the last year that he's in Atlanta. We'll cover that as well, and potential of a Tyler Allgeier trade, because speaking of, if he's this great underrated running back, it's possible some other teams are aware of this and may be interested in acquiring Allgeier if something were to happen to their starter, or if they're just not getting what they hoped from the guys they brought into the building. So that'll be the topic of today's conversation here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Before we get into it, do want to ask a quick favor. If we're working on getting our numbers up for the 2025 season, and if you do love the show, then we would appreciate a couple of small things. One thing would be, if you haven't rated the show yet on your podcast platform of choice, if you could give us a 5-star review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, whatever you use. That is apparently a big deal for podcast discovery and things like that, especially when you get above a certain threshold. I know on the Apple Podcasts in particular, because it's older, a lot of the reviews on there are from like way before I took over the show. And shout out to the guys that did it before me, but may or may not, you know, reflect the current show. So if you want to just leave a star rating, that's great. If you do want to type something, I would be happy to read it and get your feedback. I appreciate it. I know I've learned some interesting things from the reviews. I know some people have been getting like ad swarmed, and I've been trying to take care of that on multiple ends and stuff like that. I do have limited control over some of the ads, unfortunately, but you know, we appreciate all that. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe, we're trying to get to 10,000 here before the season, if possible. That would be great. So we appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you're new here, you're welcome to sit through the episode and make sure you like it before you do those things. That I totally understand that angle. So before we dive in, I do have to bring you a word from our sponsor, BetOnline, folks. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season's in full swing. The Braves are improving. I believe they're on track to win this Mets series, which would be fantastic given what's been going on prior to this. Ronald Acuna Jr. is looking great as always. We did see the wrap-up of the NHL Finals. Congrats to the Florida Panthers for winning that one. The NBA Finals are also very, very close to completion. But once that's over, BetOnline still got you covered with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. Those things include UFC and boxing, tennis. They've got all the NFL futures you can get your hands on if you're down with that. I'm sure they'll have preseason stuff whenever that comes around. If you're a true degen, you know, no judgment here. And in between games, if you're a casino lover, they've got all the top Vegas-style games on BetOnline, including live poker, live blackjack, and live slots. So you can check that out when you sign up at betonline.ag. Make sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get access to the latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. Falcons running back room going into 2025. Clickbait title, obviously, for this episode is this the best running back duo in the NFL? And, I think that's a hard question to answer. But I do think the Falcons have a claim to the best duo in the NFL. And I'll sort of present the facts here. You can make your own determination. But, Bijan Robinson obviously turns in a spectacular second season where he delivers 304 carries for 1,456 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns, which I know people were maybe moderately concerned about, Bijan being like another, is this another Kyle Pitts situation after, a good rookie season where he had close to 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns, but nowhere near what we were expecting from a guy of his caliber. Well, turns out, didn't really need to be worried, right? Because Bijan just absolutely crushed it in 2024. It was one of the NFL's best running backs without question, if not for maybe the outstanding seasons of guys like Saquon Barkley, who had a complete just career year elite season with the Philadelphia Eagles, really spurred on their Super Bowl run. Guys like Derrick Henry still crushing it at this point in their careers. There's a lot of good running backs in the NFL. It just kind of is the way it is. But Bijan, I think, belongs at the top of the list among those guys. And if the Falcons were a better team, would probably get more credit. Unfortunately, it's only so much a running back can do to help that. I think I think Saquon showed this pretty perfectly. Where if you're a good team, that elite running back can be the thing that gets you to the Super Bowl. That can be your sort of ace in the hole that is going to be able to just give you a way to dominate teams. That even with a good rest of your roster, that running back can really take you over the top. I think it's not enough on its own anymore the way it used to be with guys like Adrian Peterson, LaDainian Tomlinson, and all these elite high-volume runners that would sort of be the engine of the entire team's offense. The NFL just has moved away from that. It's more of a pass-heavy league. That's more of a critical part of the puzzle now than it has been in really any time in the NFL's history. So all that being said, I still think Bijan is an incredible weapon for this Falcons team. I think he gives them something that should be a core part of their offense. I think really it's, there's really no excuse for this Falcons rushing attack, because I think this should be one of the NFL's best run games. It's kind of disappointing when you look back to see they were just 10th in rushing yards, which is not great. This should be better. And part of that always is going to be if you don't have a running quarterback to sort of bolster your rushing numbers, that's going to prevent you from really being at the upper echelon of these rankings. And that's just kind of the way it is, right? If your quarterback's not running a ton, Bijan had almost 1,500 yards, right? That's a ridiculous number for a running back. If you're not having a quarterback adding to that, it's just going to be hard to get into the top numbers there. So that's not necessarily the number I'm focused on. For me, it's this yards per attempt number. And Falcons are 12th there with 4.5 yards per carry, but they should be better, and I think I would expect that number to improve if they can get the passing game where it needs to be, which at times in 2024 it was, and at times it was not. We saw just wild swings in this offense's ability to work, particularly the stretch where the Falcons lost 4 straight games and and only got above 20 points, one time. And that was late in the game against the Vikings in a blowout. It just was a bad situation, right? There's not really any explanation for that. We know Kirk was playing hurt and so on and so forth. And that, I think, limited this offense's potential in a big way. But you look at overall, the Falcons offense was very good last year, 6th in yardage. The passing game ended up finishing 5th in yardage, 7th in net yards per attempt. Penix contributed a lot to that late in the season. The run game, I think, needs to be a big part of how this team works. And I think Penix's style of just dropping bombs behind the defense should hopefully force opposing defenses into more of these cover 2 shells and things of that nature, where they have to, I would say, focus a lot more on defending the pass. And as you guys know, that pull, when you play cover 2, you're going to pull a safety out of the box deep. And in that scenario, that guy's not going to be in the box near the line of scrimmage ready to defend the run. that one body can be the difference in how efficient your running game could be. And we've seen this time after time. So I hope the threat of Penix, particularly pushing the ball deep, will actually open up the run game in a big way and allow those two sides of the ball, like the passing game and the run game, to really feed off each other. We know that Kirk Cousins wasn't really able to run play action at the level it needed to be run, even though historically he's been good at it. I think Penix hopefully will be more comfortable doing that this year, and that will also be a bigger part of the puzzle here in Atlanta. But there's really nothing more to say about Bijan other than I think he's always going to be in contention for the number one running back in the league, and that's not to take anything away from guys like Saquon or Derrick Henry or these other great running backs, but I think Bijan absolutely could challenge for the rushing title this year. And I think, he's a guy that could just continue to get better, particularly in the receiving game where we've seen some pretty special things from him, but it's clear that he's not super experienced in that role yet. He just seems very natural, which is a good thing, good things for sure. So I'm really excited to see what we get from Bijan in year 3, where I think he will, perhaps the only guy I would say is like more critical is maybe Drake London in terms of contributions to the offense, but I think Bijan is right there with Drake London. These are the two stars of this offense that will sort of, as they go, the offense goes, and Penix hopefully will emerge as that third star that's going to be delivering here. But really excited to see, and I think Bijan, as I draft him high in fantasy for those asking. I mean, I'm obviously not unbiased. I would overpay for Bijan simply because in fantasy, I think it's important to draft players you like and draft players that you want to watch every week. So that obviously will break ties in favor of Bijan for me. But even if I wasn't a Falcons fan, I would recommend Bijan just because I think you're getting him at somewhat of a discount compared to like the top guys. You're obviously still having to take him pretty, high in the first round. Maybe if it's super flex, you get him a little bit later, but I would not be scared off of taking Bijan, high in the first round. I think he's going to deliver on that. I think the Falcons offense as a whole will deliver. And I think any concerns you had after his rookie year about, is he going to live up to this? They're pretty much quieted at this point. So now it's just, can he take that next step to being like the number one running back in the league? And I think the Falcons are excited to see if that can happen. The other main running back to talk about here in Atlanta is, of course, Tyler Allgeier, who is a very good player, right? This is a guy that since Bijan was drafted, and there's a lot of people that are like, why did we bother? Even though Bijan's great, like Tyler Allgeier is still really good. Finished just a hair behind Bijan in yards per carry. But Allgeier as a rookie broke the Falcons rookie rushing record with 1,035 yards. And that was on a team that had nothing in the passing game and basically just depended on Allgeier to crush teams into oblivion. Since then, he's, I think, been very effective as sort of a complement to Bijan, particularly last year. I think we saw, he was still able to amass 4.7 yards per carry and took 137 carries as a reserve, which is a very healthy number for a running back too. And Allgeier's not, necessarily a target hog as a receiver, probably shouldn't be, but he's, I think, been pretty solid when called upon to catch the ball. He's not going to be dynamic like Bijan, but he's a reliable set of hands, and he can break tackles after the catch. So he is someone that's interesting there. And, I think when you get into Allgeier, you're looking at a different style of runner, still great vision, very difficult to bring down. Not shifty necessarily like Bijan, not someone that's going to break ankles the way Bijan's kind of made a habit of doing, but very strong, very physical, pretty much going to fall forward on every carry, very good short yardage back, and someone that's going to bring a lot of physicality to runs where Bijan's capable of that, but he's not to the level of Tyler Allgeier. And I think that gives Atlanta a really nice 1-2 punch with a true workhorse, do-it-all guy in Bijan and a physical sort of bruiser in Allgeier, who I think is, if this Falcons team could just get some leads, we could unleash, I think, Tyler Allgeier in the second half of games if the Falcons are able to build some leads and just let him pummel the defense, let Michael Penix launch some bombs behind it, and just you can really destroy the will of an opponent with that type of strategy and give Bijan's legs some rest if you can actually get to that point. Unfortunately for the Falcons, they didn't really have that opportunity, and Allgeier didn't get as many carries as I think he could have gotten in the long run. But that duo of Bijan's special movement skills, vision, ability to just break tackles and create space out of nowhere, along with Allgeier's just physicality, smarts. Both of those guys are great blockers as well. I think they absolutely do have a claim at being the best 1-2 punch in the NFL. I think the other one that's compelling, obviously, is Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I think those two are probably the closest competition. And Jahmyr Gibbs is very good, definitely better than I thought he was going to be coming out. I mean, he was close to matching Bijan's yardage total, and also, of course, I think was more productive as a receiver, right? Had 16 touchdowns as well. There's obviously context involved in that, the Lions had like the best offense in the NFL or close to it, and they have maybe the best offensive line in the NFL, although the Falcons' offensive line is certainly close behind. So I think it's an open question there. I think if you're making a case, the Lions probably have the best case, other than the Falcons. But the fact that the Falcons are in that conversation at all says a lot. And I think David Montgomery is also underrated, just like Tyler Allgeier. But not going to get too hung up on that aspect of it. But I do think it's an interesting conversation, and I think the Falcons have a claim, and we'll see how the careers of Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson sort of play out over the remainder of the next year or two or whatnot. But next up, we're going to get to the depth guys on the roster. Now, the Falcons do have quite a few running backs behind those two. They have 4 guys that are on the roster at this moment. They did recently make a move here where the team said goodbye to Jashaun Corbin, they signed Jashaun Corbin, said goodbye to 2024 6th-round pick Jace McClellan, who didn't really get to do much last year, did end up getting on the roster, but only played a handful of snaps thanks to Bijan and Tyler Allgeier staying healthy, and missed most of training camp preseason due to injury. Just seems like the Falcons were not satisfied, and the fact that they waived him before camp means that he was not in contention for the roster, which is kind of surprising. Like, if that must mean that they really like Carlos Washington or Nate Carter or Elijah Dotson or all of those guys, and I'm like, wow, Jace is the lowest man out of this group, so we just need to let him go and see if he can catch on elsewhere. Jashaun Corbin is the new signing, so we'll talk about him first. I mean, interesting player, undersized, former UDFA, ended up playing, a couple years in the NFL, only took 1 regular season carry. Always has had great vision. That's kind of been his calling card, but not the fastest, not the biggest, not the most physical. He does have great contact balance, and that was really what made him special, I think, in the UFL, where he was the leading rusher. Just bounces off of tackles easily, stays on his feet, sees the hole well. I think he's got, guys that can see, that have the vision. I mean, and especially in this zone blocking scheme the Falcons are going to run primarily, I think they've always got a shot. That's, I think, one of the big things with a lot of these athletic running backs is they just kind of put their foot in the ground and go, and they don't really consider as much as they should, because that's a huge deal in the NFL where you just need to follow your blocks most of the time. So I think Corbin's got a shot, but I think he's got to basically upset Carlos Washington Jr., who has more or less been the de facto RB3 for 2 years now, or close to it. And Washington has bounced on and off the practice squad. He was kind of splitting with Jace McClellan. But at this point, the fact that the team has moved on from McClellan might mean that Washington Jr. has sort of seized the job, the RB3 job, or that they like one of these other guys. But Washington's interesting. I think he's had some encouraging preseason performances. We haven't really seen much at all during the season, but someone that could potentially, be a decent RB3 option. Nate Carter was the UDFA the Falcons brought in. He is sort of a athletic specialist, like a guy that's just super fast, has explosive traits, kind of an inconsistent college career at Michigan State, but someone that's very intriguing, has some fans in the draft community, but we'll have to kind of prove that he can play the position at the NFL level, even though I think he probably has the most impressive athletic profile of anyone here other than Bijan. So definitely one to watch in that regard. Could be sort of a sneaky return specialist as well. So that's one to keep in mind. That's another thing with Jashaun Corbin. He does have kick return experience, so that could be something that helps both of those guys make it. Elijah Dotson, not someone I know a ton about. The Falcons did bring him in, and obviously he stuck around this far. So he's another guy I think is competing most likely for the practice squad. I mean, I think most of these guys, of these four, like one might make the roster, maybe two if the Falcons do keep four running backs. I don't really think they will. And in that case, you're talking one of these guys maybe making it and maybe one going to the practice squad. So tough competition coming up. We'll see more, obviously, in training camp. It's really hard to kind of grade these guys at all. In OTAs and stuff, there's not really any contact. Even in training camp, it's kind of limited. So I think at this stage, it's very much a wait and see. But I'm intrigued by Corbin. I'm intrigued by Nate Carter. And obviously, Carlos Washington Jr. is the favorite. But that's sort of where the roster stands heading into the summer. And yeah, I mean, this is the top two options make this just one of the strongest positions on the roster. Last year, the Falcons I think the third running back played like 2% of snaps because there's not really any reason to use the third guy. Avery Williams was, I think, the third running back, and he was mostly just a return specialist. So, we'll see if anything changes this year. We'll obviously hope everyone continues to stay healthy. But, the big question is, like, does a good offer come in for Tyler Allgeier at some point, whether that's before the season or during the season before the trade deadline? Because the Falcons do have a need for picks. And we'll have to see, if that's something the Falcons want to do. I think they're pretty happy to have the depth. This is kind of echoing like the situation at quarterback where they just have another good starter, like ready to go. That's not the same as their, chosen starter, but is a guy that they'd rather keep than not unless a great offer comes in. Obviously with Kirk, there's financial incentive to move him because you could save a ton of money. But with Allgeier, there's not. Allgeier's contract is not expensive, and he's not someone that's going to save the team much cap space to move on from. So I'm curious to see if the team holds Allgeier or if they do end up moving him. I think it's a possibility. I don't think that's something they're going to run out to do or necessarily pursue heavily. But I think, depending on the offer, depending on how things go, he's probably one of the more likely offensive players alongside guys like Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins to get moved because they have outside value. The Falcons do need picks, but I think teams like maybe would be offering like a fourth for Tyler Allgeier. And I think the Falcons might need more than that to consider moving him. So it's not something that I think they're going to rush out to do at this point. So we'll see how that develops, but I do think the Falcons running back room is outstanding. It's great. Bijan's going to be one of the best running backs in the NFL once again. Tyler Allgeier will be right there behind him if he needs to take a breather and gives the team that sort of bruising presence that can I hope they can use more effectively late in games. And there's a group of young guys here that I think are intriguing. I think this is probably a spot that if Allgeier does depart in free agency next year, which is likely, that another like decently high running back pick is going to enter the fray here, or a free agent signing perhaps, but probably more of a draft need. And that'll be interesting as well to see who the Falcons do try to pair with Bijan long term. But yeah, thanks for watching today's episode, guys. We will be back early next week with another one of these. I'm not sure what position we're going to go to next to let the guests decide. But yeah, we'll continue rolling these out. We'll have a couple of these a week to complement the Wednesday live shows, which are at 8 p.m. We're going to keep those going all through this next month until training camp. Hope to be able to announce some firm details about training camp soon. I know the first practice is on July 24th, so I'm pretty sure both Adnan and myself are going to be there for that. And then after that, I'm not sure. We're working on setting up another live event for fans to meet up with us and maybe do a live show. Something like that is definitely in the works, so keep your eyes and ears perked up for that. But yeah, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. You can also give us a 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice. If you want to support the show, you can do so on Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live, YouTube channel memberships. Thanks again to BetOnline for sponsoring today's episode. We will see you guys next time on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Have a great day, folks. Thanks.